right. Well, welcome everybody to today's Talk with Doc. It is my honor to introduce Dr. Stephanie Holmes, and today we are talking on marriage and how the church can support families in their marriage with special needs. And so, Stephanie, thank you so much for being here. Why don't you just take a couple of minutes and introduce yourself and let everyone know who you are?
Well, hi, I'm Dr. Stephanie Holmes, and I'm coming to you from Atlanta, Georgia, but I'm a Carolina girl at heart. I'm born and raised in the Carolinas. I am passionate about our topic because I also have a young adult on the autism spectrum. She's 22, doing well in graduate school. We've certainly learned some things along the way of her journey with autism, and then I have changed my practice more to a focus of marriage and family and marriages with special needs persons in their family system.
Yeah, it's awesome. We're so happy to have you. And real quick, anyone who's watching on Zoom, you can put your questions if you have today in the Q&A or in the section there or the comment section. If you're watching with us on Facebook Live, you can push them in the comment section. I'm following that there too, and we're happy to answer your questions as we're going today with everything. So let's kind of jump right into it with everything. And there's so much. This is such an important topic for us to address. And I think while the church spends so much time improving, especially those that have ministries, are working on trying to take care of the individuals with special needs. One of the things, Stephanie, I'm constantly saying is, any good ministry has to take care of the entire family. A disability ministry will involve the entire family. As you and I both know as parents, it's more than just the child, it's everybody involved. So, we need to think through that and talk about that. So, we need to see how the church can come alongside and support these families a little bit better and help them through this. So, I know your daughter is a big part and the reason why you're doing what you're doing and all that. But let's just kind of dig right in and see what are some of the things that I know you've said before. You've actually changed your approach with counseling with things so that you can focus on families with needs. Why don't you just talk about that real quick, and then we'll get into some of the issues that families are facing.
Okay, so when you're talking about families with needs, and now my particular realm of expertise is autism, but once you're in the special need community, you start to broaden your perspective of other special needs populations, and you can also have kids with autism who have other medical needs, food allergy needs, and all of that. But what I'd like just for other counselors and pastors and ministers to know is we'll talk a little bit on the first way to support the family is to actually get them to come to your church. And that's a whole other discussion. But some of the things that families with needs are facing, first of all, is growing isolation. Depending on what's going on with the child, and let's just say autism and developmental issues, if there are quote behavior challenges, which is usually a trigger phrase for the autism community, but is perceived as behavior challenges. There's a lot of places that the family doesn't feel welcome or able to go. And so they may feel like they're living in a little bit more isolation. And I'm kind of hoping for those of us, we've been going through the pandemic, maybe we're growing some empathy for living in isolation, but that's what the average special needs family is really going through, is that level of isolation. Then kind of broadening that to understanding that the family has different, maybe financial issues, because there is a greater amount of therapies and treatments and protocols they may be going. Not all of these things are usually covered by insurance. And let's just use OT. You get maybe 30 per year, but there's 52 weeks in a year. So that's never made sense to me. There's also maybe family relationship issues. I mean, we don't live in a society right now where we have a lot of extended family living closer near us. And so that family might not have extended family able to help. Sometimes I've heard of situations where the family will say, we'll take care of all of these children, but we won't watch that one. So then that causes some relationship strains because they don't want to watch or care for or be involved with a child with special needs, but yet, want to be with all their other grandchildren and nieces and nephews and not that one child. Then just kind of thinking about this family may have greater physical exhaustion because they're both caretakers and parents, and probably either navigating the public school system and fighting for their rights, or they're homeschooling and navigating all of the challenges at home. So you have all of these things that can really bring some bigger strains and stressors to the marriage and to the family system. And just sadly, a lot of these times the families do not have a lot of support. And that's where I think the church could really rise to the occasion.
Absolutely. And I truly believe the church is called to rise and be there for them. So let's kind of get into that. There are many issues that families with special needs face that first off, and one of the biggest one is the overwhelming majority of churches just are not inclusive. They're not able to welcome them. But on top of that, there are still a lot of myths and a lot of stigmas that are out there affecting a family with individuals with special needs. Can you talk about some of those and just how that affects the family, and then inadvertently then how the church can overcome these myths and stigmas?
Interestingly enough, if you want to hear a whole 30-minute spill on that, you can go to Converge Autism Radio. I just did one on ableism versus empowerment. But part of that discusses that the stigma of kind of being different or having a mental issue or a physical disability, I feel like kind of stems from the religious culture. Even if you go all the way back to Jesus's day, the disciples asked Jesus, who sinned, this man or his family? And there is actually still a lot of that in the church community, that a disability, a difference, autism is a curse, it's a punishment, a generational curse. Some have even had experiences where their child has been put through like an exorcism because seeing that their behaviors are maybe demonic oppression or possession. And sometimes in the Pentecostal charismatic church, which I'm Pentecostal, so I'm not putting us down, but I'm saying there's a higher degree of that happening in those types of churches, and the kind of name it and claim it type of churches that don't speak that word, don't speak the disability, over your child. Don't say your child has autism. Don't say your child has cerebral palsy. Don't say your child has this, because you're putting the label or putting the words out in the universe that's going to keep them cursed. That's a huge issue that sometimes can divide families, because I'm kind of the mindset, like it's a difference, it's a neurological difference. And that ableism, which you've never heard, if you've not heard that word, ableism is as racism is to different cultures and races, ableism is the same to our disability population, a preference or seeing a superiority for those who are able or able-bodied or able-minded, and seeing that that is somehow a superior way of life than someone who has a disability or a mental health issue. So that ableism, I think, can be very, very strong in the church, and I think that's creating some of the stigma of why families don't necessarily feel they want to come to church.
Yeah, that's so good. And I think ableism is rampant, not just in the church, but all across America today. And it's very, very alive there. And someone might be listening to this right now and saying, oh, there's no way that can be happening, that someone actually still thinks that, that someone would think that. It does. I've had a parent call me from another state and saying, Doc, we need help. We've just been told we have to leave our church because our child has Down syndrome. And they're telling us it was because of a sin from my husband and myself. I said, well, wait a minute. Isn't your husband on staff at the church? He was the student pastor at the church. And they said, yes. In fact, they just fired him over it. So, this happens all the time with it. And first and bottom line, and scriptural, we are all created in the image and likeness of God. And that includes every individual with disability. They are not a mistake. They are fearfully and wonderfully made, just like everyone else. And I love that passage in John 9 there that you were commenting on. And Jesus said, neither the parent nor the child had sinned. In that, but instead it goes on further so that that praise can occur and so blessings can occur with that. So we need to see that. So there are so many different things that are going on with these families in the church, and because of that, they don't feel welcomed. They don't feel like they can come in. And then when they are having issues, if they do have marital issues, most parents feel like they can go to the church because of the stigma that's already been there for families with individuals' disabilities. They don't feel like they're welcomed in the church to be able to talk to the church with that. So why don't we talk a little bit about, families with needs and what their needs are like with that when it comes to the church. And, I know a lot of times they just feel more isolated.
Yeah, and so that first step in better supporting marriages and families with special needs, like we said, is we got to get them to church. And I pulled up some statistics really quick. I was like, what's just out there right now? And so just a couple of these that I found. A 2018 survey, children on the autism spectrum are the least likely population to be served in a church. A family with a child on the spectrum is the least likely to ever attend one church service. And that was comparing autism with all physical disabilities combined. Another study said that for a family who has a positive experience in church and has a church community, they said that the church played the most positive role, not only in the spiritual development of the child with autism, but in mental, relational, and social growth that the child had ever experienced because of having that extra community in addition to the sports. Now, sadly, that was a very small population in that sample because there was a very limited sample. So just to kind of say that, community is important. And I feel like, and I know you believe this as well, that the church community should be the most inclusive place on the planet.
Amen.
It's triggering and saddening to me. I think you gave a statistic that was very abysmal on how many evangelical churches can support families with needs.
Only 11% of evangelical churches in the United States today are even able to support individuals with special needs.
And what makes me sad is there's sometimes a mentality that until we actually have this as an issue, we're not going to prepare. Like until we have a handful or more than one, like it's not worth a budgetary discretionary item. But in all of these surveys, there were three things that kept popping up on why a family that has a child or an adult on the autism spectrum may not come to church. And the first one was the stigma. We've already kind of talked about that. This like something's wrong with us, disability, bad parenting kind of thing, if there's a behavior. The second thing is kind of what we're talking about right now, which was a lack of inclusion, support services, and unwelcoming church culture. So many families say when we show up and then there's like a deer in the headlight looks of like, we don't know what to do with your child. Your child is biologically 8, but may be at the capacity of a 2-year-old. Where is the placement? We don't know. Or I'm afraid we don't have a buddy or a para for your child. You're just going to have to navigate that in service. That's sense of not being welcome. You're not prepared. Doesn't make that family feel like you had them in mind. So that's back to the ableist mindset. Ableism is we are only concerned about those who are able to get here and those who are able to operate within the community of which we are able to provide. But when you step back and say, okay, we don't have any children maybe right now who are identified on the spectrum or developmental delays, ADHD, those what we call hidden disabilities. What are we going to do to prepare? Why don't we go ahead and have buddies in place? Why don't we have paras in place so that when that happens, maybe that person doesn't serve, like they're trained and they're ready to go, but no one shows up that needs the service. No harm, no foul. You had someone who was prepared and ready to serve even if a family didn't show up. But that lack of that the welcoming, hospitable climate, if that's not there and the family doesn't see other families like them there, or they're trying to tell you, even food allergies, that's another huge issue, because churches usually involve food and candy in children's church or youth groups. If you're not even willing to make a food accommodation. I remember one time at one of the churches we attended, I had told the room leader that my daughter had a peanut allergy, and it's like the death peanut allergy. So it's not just ingestion, it's like can't smell it. And when we arrived to that midweek service, they are in there and I see a jar of peanut butter, and I was like, what's going on here? We can't, come in the room. She's like, don't worry, we're not eating it. We're making bird feeders. And I was like, okay, but that's going to involve touching the peanut butter, smelling the peanut butter, and you've already put it in the room. So now we can't even come into the room. And the attitude with me was like, well, then I guess she can't come in, can she? And so it's like, okay, we could have used sunflower butter. We could have maybe used another sticky substance. Like, that lack of sometimes wanting to make a very simple modification or accommodation that wouldn't really have cost anything, could still make the bird feeders, just in a different way. There's marshmallow goo, there's chocolate syrup, there's a lot of ways that you can stick some honey, right? But that attitude that's like, you're inconveniencing me by asking me to make accommodation, that is what a lot of people feel. And there's far more children with food allergies than autism. So that's even an accommodation that can feel unwelcoming. And then the third reason that families say they can't come is, with everything else kind of going on in their life, they're not willing to take a chance to come to church on Sunday to give up their time to a place that might not welcome them. So there's already like, how am I going to spend my time, and what are we going to do on our free day? And if I'm not 100% guaranteed that this is going to be a fit for me, why am I going to put my whole family through the stress of getting this child dressed and out the door into church if I don't feel like this is the right fit? So those three things are the biggest reasons that we're not able to serve. And I think Lifeway research said the autism population is the least served and supported by the American church. And that I'm really hoping that talks like this will start to change that.
Right. And I frequently say that autism has become the A word in churches. They're afraid to even say the word because they don't understand it. And here's the thing, you don't have to be fearful about it. And what I always say, and it's one of my favorite sayings with it, I only have one requirement for people to be able to work with an individual with autism or any special needs. My one requirement: can you be a friend? And if you're able to be a friend, you can work with these individuals. They're so much fun to work with. And then you can train, you can learn everything else. So, churches that are out there, there are organizations like us at SOAR who want to come in and help train you so that you can welcome these families. But February is a big month that a lot of churches, thanks to having Valentine's there, they talk about, they'll have marriage conferences. They'll actually have, messages on marriage and things like that. All fantastic. But the church needs to understand a couple of things. First off, overall for our families with disabilities, it's estimated divorce rate, it's sky high. It's estimated around 80 to 90%. You add a medical illness like seizures or diabetes, it jumps even higher. And they just don't have that support. And the church needs to be that support. But many churches are doing little conferences. They're doing marriage weekends or something where they might have a conference and they're providing childcare for the parents and families. That's fantastic. But they're not able to welcome individuals with special needs. I've talked with some families that are like, oh, we would desperately love to go to that, but our church said they don't have resource to be able to take our child with special needs, or that we had to stay with the child. Well, how can the mom and dad get anything out of the conference if they have to stay with them? So this is where the church needs to start thinking outside the box in what they can do and how they can help. And do things. And so, again, a disability ministry needs to run through every part of the entire church and be able to support the families in every way. But we need to develop community. I think that's one of our biggest things, and that's what families desperately need. Every church is looking to create community, but they're forgetting about families with disabilities, and our marriages need that when you're able to have community with others too. So think through how you can do that. So we've talked through a few things here. What can we tell the church? What can we do as a church to help support our families better?
So after we get them there, people love to kind of tell their story, and it's having gone through, so if you have a child on the spectrum or a child with needs, you're, like we said, probably either homeschooling, which is its own set of challenges and issues there, or you're usually fighting with the public school system to get the supports and resources that you need. So the secondary kind of fight that a family doesn't want to deal with, for every parent that I have ever met who has a child with needs, they are fighting for full inclusion or mainstream or as much involvement with neurotypical children as possible for that child. Medically fragile is a whole different issue, but
Right.
you're fighting for your child to be with other neurotypical same age peers. And so sometimes that's another issue, even for some churches who have special needs programs, they want to separate or segregate the child from the neurotypical peers, which as a starting point, maybe that's a place you go. At least the parents get to go to church, but that can't be where we stay, because I think another thing that is really crucial for the church is to help train our children and youth and other people in the church how to love, support, and include people with differences. So if we do have a special needs place and we're just taking all of the kids who are different and sticking them in a different room and kind of babysitting them and not really talking about their spiritual growth or what they need, how are we teaching the neurotypical children to love and include, people who are different? We would never do that, hopefully, over race. We wouldn't say, well, here is our African American room, and here is our Hispanic room, and here is our white room. But yet we don't have a problem going, well, here is our able-bodied room, and here is our disabled body room. Here is our neurotypical children, and here are our autistic children. Brown versus the Board of Education came up with segregated is not equal. So that's that other piece, because then the parents like, okay, oh, they have a special needs ministry, but then we're going to walk in and have our children feel like a second class citizen. That's again not a place I'm going to be welcome. So I think being willing to listen, having nights or times where you can even have Zoom meetings to talk to parents. If you don't know what they need, ask. And maybe you're not going to be able to provide all of that. Maybe you just don't have that. But sometimes just being asked, what do you need? What would help you? What would feel like a support to you? Because sometimes churches can do what the public school system can do. Well, here's what we have, and here's what we're going to offer you. Take it or leave it. And it's like, but that's not very supportive, or that doesn't really help me. So I think that next step, if we've got them in, is ask them, what would be helpful? What would you need? And we don't have that now, but if we start here, buddies is I think the most important thing. Buddies is the first step. But once we have that going, what's the next thing? What do you need? What would help you have some respite? How would you get to have a date night? Because that's another thing. We counselors and ministers are really famous for saying date nights are important and protect your marriage. It's really important, which it is.
Right.
But how does my special needs family go out on a date if they can't find a sitter or respite or a place for their child to go? Or like you said, how do they come to your Valentine dinner if their children are not welcome in the service, or they're not welcome in the child providing services? Where do they go? Do they get to pay 3 times the amount for a special needs babysitter? Well, again, these things are not going to be the cost that a parent's going to be like, church function or just go out to eat on my own. That's not a very difficult thing, to decide there. So there's that respite. And then understanding that sometimes in these situations, we have a higher population that a parent may also be on the spectrum. That's a whole another part of a discussion later, but I looked up some other stats as we were talking, that there are 1 in every 3 families that are single that is a single mother, 1 in 3 single moms are raising a child with a disability. So that kind of goes to there is a higher divorce rate.
Right.
And then also there was, of the 54 million people in America that have some kind of reported disability, 5% of those have an adult and a child in the same home with some kind of reported disability. So when you're in understanding the disability culture and community, you've got to, again, you're thinking about ministering to that child on the spectrum, because we want that child to grow spiritually and have a relationship with Jesus, whatever that means for that child. The parents, their marriage, nurturing their marriage and their relationship, and then building that third layer of community. Who then can this couple relate to within the church? Because that's the third piece. How do you do small groups? How do you do discipleship if they don't feel there's anyone they can connect with? So there's like a 3-prong approach that I think we could do better at inclusion ministry.
I agree completely with all that. And I think one important thing with the ask part, ministries that are out there, when you're building your leadership teams, invite a parent or two on that leadership team so you can get their input into things as you're doing it. Especially if you as a leader or as the coordinator or director, if you're not a parent, it's great to have that other input, that parent input there, to be able to understand what's going on. Maybe something doesn't work, but they will be great in giving you that insight. And I can't agree anymore. We have to ask. And it might be as simple as just calling the parents and individually and say, hey, how can we better support you? What can we do? And ask them to be honest, and be as real as possible. And my best advice for you, have your big boy pants on, because it may be hard for you to hear, because you might hear all the things that you're not doing well. But take that lovingly and realize how you can then come along and better support these families. Because all of our hope, I know every church wants to support families. A church doesn't come out and say, oh, we only want to support, a couple families here and leave everyone else. That's not their intention. I think the reason that families with special needs are being forgotten or ignored, honestly, is just a lack of education, and ignorance there. So that's where we need to step up. We need to stand in the gap and help be the voice of our families and help teach them and educate them through that, because our families can feel just so isolated all the time, and they can feel that their voice won't be heard with anything. So,
and they've probably gone through some church hurt and rejection.
Oh,
so you've got to understand that too, that maybe if that person is coming across a little terse with you, maybe they don't trust you yet. Maybe because of situations that they've had where they've been fired from a staff job or asked to leave because their child is just too high maintenance, or another church member said something to them. So my home church back in North Carolina, sometimes after, let me first say, in case the children's pastor is watching, every children's pastor my daughter had loved my daughter and that she loved them. But some of the other volunteers in the other rooms had different opinions. And so as a church member, like my family were the founding members, so it wasn't going to be something I would leave the church over. But it was a constant practice that I would be getting parenting books handed to me by the Sunday school teacher or the breakout room. I got Dare to Discipline, A Strong-Willed Child, Shepherding a Child's Heart. And my favorite was an Amish one called Chain Up a Child, but actually told you just to spank your child on a regular basis for no apparent reason, just to condition them to obey. So there was this constant, even from other people in the church, when they witnessed one of her either meltdowns or eloping, that something was wrong with the parenting. So that's that church culture and understanding. As a professional, I was able to go, ignorance, they just don't understand. But that's not your average congregant who may be dealing with that. And so to be told by another congregant, like, your child is a problem, or, I really get depressed when I see your daughter show up in my class.
Oh, yeah.
These are awful things to say to a parent, or you need better parenting, or have you considered getting some parenting classes? That's also going to be another deterrent for that family in coming back, because that just says, well, they don't see that this is autism or a developmental issue or anxiety or ADHD, that you feel that those are, well, except for The Train of a Child, that was a terrible book. The other books are great books, but it's meant for normal family parenting dynamics. So then again, that ignorance, like you were saying, can really be hurtful, even though that's not someone's intention, and create more church hurt for that family.
And I think that's why, especially every children's pastor, every children's director, every student pastor, student ministry director that is out there, it is mandatory that you train your volunteers at least a little bit on special needs and how to work with families and what to say, what not to say. Just basic education. Because, I've heard those exact statements. I've been told those statements myself that you've shared, and they are hurtful, and they will drive families away from the church. And so we need to educate and teach people what to say, how to say it, and be loving with all of it. So, we want to get people to the church. We want to ask them, what's our next step? What else can we do with our families?
So, and then, so if we can get them there, and we can create that culture of inclusion, and then we've got to think about, we've also mentioned kind of respite, right? If we're going to offer support for this marriage, I mean, this marriage needs some time alone. This mom and dad need some time to go on a date, and then, my goodness, a weekend away. I mean, there was probably 6 years that was probably not possible unless, a family member could watch our daughter for us, because the transition and routine, because if you understand anything about autism, the autistic child does not like change in routine, and they do not like a lot of uncertainties, and they do not like just new people showing up into their life. So that's why that community aspect is so important, that you as the church and the community are you're part of that family's life, that if you do say, hey, one of our buddies might be available, to do, childcare or help, or, what else can we do for respite weekends, and being familiar with what's available in your community. What does your community have? And then I feel like I definitely got to plug SOAR. You can contact SOAR, Key Ministry, Johnny and Friends. There are these ministries, some that have free supports for you, some that have some training with minimal cost, that you can ask questions to, like, help, we have this family and we want to keep them here and make them feel welcome. Just give us some basics we can do. There are support ministries like SOAR out there that will come alongside. So you don't even have to do it alone. You can reach out to people who already are doing it well and lean on theirs. So sometimes I think churches get stuck in fear, and I'd love for you to address some of that, but I think there's fear in messing up and liability, and I would love to hear you talk about liability. And then I think the getting started, I think kind of getting over the hurdle of getting started, hearing what we don't know, and then, oh, there's a liability risk there. I don't think we really want to open this up, because we're bringing on too much liability to have families with needs. And so I'd love for you to talk about that liability issue.
Absolutely. And that's one of the ones I love talking about. In fact, I've got an entire talk I do on myth busting, on how you can get senior leadership on board, because, whenever you try to present, a lot of times senior leadership will have all these myths on why you can't do it. Oh, we don't have the volunteers, we don't have the money. And liability is always one of those big ones. Well, first off, you have liability in doing anything. There's liability in doing a children's ministry, liability in doing student ministry. And guess what? There's no difference with doing a special needs disability ministry. And just about every single liability insurance policy that is out there automatically covers everything that you would do with the disability ministry. I've only come across one church that had a really bad policy that had to get something extra. But every church I've ever worked with, I've now worked with helped over 380 churches in launching or creating ministry. every single one has never had to add on liability insurance because they were already covered. And that includes us, in which we're doing respite, we're doing camps, all these big events, it was already covered. It's part of the liability that was already there. So it's there. You can be wise. You can have consents that you have your families fill out. You have to be smart in preventing things by training volunteers. That's vital. Every volunteer needs to be trained. And you need a background check on every individual who's 18 years old and older. When you do that, you really start decreasing that liability, because when you can train people on knowing what to do and how to work with it, you completely, lower the likelihood of having bad outcomes coming in. I always recommend that you take some of your high leadership, high level volunteers, and you do a higher level training for them. What I like is nonviolent crisis intervention training called CPI. I'm actually a national certified instructor in that, and we train that at our Wonderfully Made conference. But that's something where you can learn how to de-escalate behavior and how to do everything and do it in a safe manner that puts everyone very safely and takes care of things. So that when you do have bad behaviors coming, you have a better likely outcome with it. But liability is just an excuse. Bottom line, Luke 14 commands the church to do disability ministry. Jesus said, bring those with, who are lame, who are blind, into the church and give them a seat at the table, be in the church, and give them a seat of recognition so that the church can be blessed. And that's what happens when you welcome these families. But we need to do everything. Absolutely agree with what you said, the respite part. That is one of the best ways we can support families with special needs, providing respite. And it's not hard. And we may have to do things different now, post-COVID. And many of us haven't been able to do things yet because of COVID. But for us here at SOAR, we're relaunching all of our respite in person again. It's going to be different. We used to do 150 plus individuals with special needs at a time. Well, now we're doing 10 at a time, but we're going to do 4 of them, 1 on Friday, 3 on Saturday, just so we can try to get as many families as we can, but do it in a safe manner. But what's happening? We're providing community for the families, and that's what they so desperately need. I think another thing that the church can do, and again, if you're interested in doing the respite, just like Stephanie said, we'd love to help you. So contact us at SOAR. But I think the other thing, just about every church I know today are doing community groups or small groups. Mm-hmm. All too many times we forget the families with special needs in those groups. I can't tell you the number of times where, I've been called and asked to go talk to a family with special needs because the leader of the group doesn't want them in their home anymore because, something's gotten broken or it's too hard. Well, we need to train, we need to educate, and we need to come up with a plan that actually works for everyone, where we can welcome these families into, these community groups. Why? We all need to be discipled. We all need to grow closer with Christ, and we need community with one another. We need, even if you want to make it a house church, I don't care. We have to figure out how we can bring in more community with one another. So I don't know if you've got anything to say on that, but I know that's one thing that I've been passionate about, trying to figure out how we can do a better job of welcoming families into community groups.
Yeah, I would just like for all of us to remember back in March of last year of 2020, when all the churches had to shut down, all of us shut down, and my church did online church very well. It was wonderful. It was great. And for March, it was like, woohoo, I'm staying home in my pajamas and watching church with my dog. And you didn't feel guilty about it because,
right.
Everybody's doing it. But as it became April and May, it's like, I want to go back to church. I want to be with people again. I'm not going to complain about greeting at the door anymore because I just want to see the people. And so while virtual can be a good option as a backup. And so, yes, providing good virtual church and online programs is great, for mom and dad. It still lacks that fellowship and the not forsaking of the fellowship and community. And it's just, I've done online groups and I've done in-person groups, and there is just like one more layer of kind of that fellowship, community, and connection that you get being with live people in a live setting. So while virtual is great and virtual small groups are great, and sometimes if that's all a family has available to them, then that's what we do. But I love that idea of a small like home church, or getting that a small group of community even within a church together at some level.
Right.
Because again, just think about how we all felt last March and April, feeling like we were isolated and like, I need to get to a people. That's how our special needs families have been feeling for decades. And then also just right now during COVID, a lot of the families are lacking the supports they usually get in school because of virtual learning right now. They may not be able to get to their OTs and PTs and all their special services. And then if they did have a church that was reaching out to them, they've really lost a lot of support right now. So I would just even say, just as a fellow Christian and believer, if you know someone who has a child who has a special need, just check on them, ask how they're doing, and just even giving that layer of support can be something you as a church member or a Christian can do. What about my friend who has that child on the spectrum? Or what about my friend who has an adult who will never be independent, living as a child in their home? Have I asked how they're doing lately? Have I asked something I could do personally for them? So I think let's take it even out of church leadership to the congregant. As a Christian and as a believer, you're not off the hook. There are things that you could do as well, no matter what your church is doing, because probably somewhere in your community, there's a family with a special needs child, youth, or adult in their household.
Yeah, absolutely love that. So true there. I want to shift just a little bit, shift gears here just a little bit, and hit something that I know is your bread and butter and that you're just super passionate about right now. And that is neurodiverse marriages. So first, could you explain what a neurodiverse marriage is? And then I think that's especially something that the church is completely clueless about and doesn't know what to do or anything. So let's talk on how the church can come along families that are in a neurodiverse marriage.
Okay, so the first part of that is kind of understanding a little bit just in a broad view of neurodiversity. So neurodiversity, you're talking about neurology, right? So we're going back to, this is not a behavior problem or a sin problem. There's actually neurological or wiring differences in the brain of someone who's ADHD, someone on the autism spectrum, somebody with a learning delay. And so all of that kind of falls into a neurodiverse kind of category. Well, maybe many of you, like me, maybe you are a doctor or a clinician or a social worker, and you were introduced to the concept of ADHD or autism maybe back in the 80s and 90s. It was believed back then that individuals would grow out of it, that as a developmental delay, that somehow magically between the age of 18 and 20, if a child was ADHD, they would no longer be ADHD when they were an adult. Or if they were high functioning autism, or what we used to call Asperger's, that somehow in adulthood, all of the features that come along with autism would disappear. So I was told in my graduate program that I would never see an adult on the spectrum in counseling. It just wouldn't happen. And the whole reason that they were teaching us about autism or Asperger's, because this was back in the 90s when Asperger's had just been introduced, was because you need to know this for differential diagnosis. You need to know how to, diagnose this differently than, say, personality disorder or anxiety disorder, but you'll never see this individual come to counseling. So, we've been studying for a really long time, what's going on with the impact of autism. And certainly we're not going to try to say what are all the causes of autism, but a very, very important study in 2019 by JAMA, which is a very, reasonable place to do it. And as a researcher, you'll understand that a 2.1 million population is a huge population for a longitudinal study. That, I mean, sometimes you'll get like a cause of autism is maternal age, and you had 20 people in that study, but 2.1 million people is a lot of people across 5 countries, across longitudinal. And what they found was an 80% genetic factor for what we would call autism level 1, formerly high functioning autism or Asperger's. So we can say there is a strong genetic link in autism. And sometimes autism may skip a generation. As you start looking through your ancestors and see a lot of maybe engineers and computer people or architects, you might start finding some of those on the family tree. But that brings now a whole new family dynamic. So we were previously talking about a special needs family, assuming mom and dad were both neurotypical and they had a child on the spectrum. Now let's broaden that let's say maybe 70 to 80%, one of those parents, not always, but usually dad, could be on the autism spectrum as well. So now we have a marriage system who's got 2 different people of 2 different brain wirings trying to work together to marriage and partner. And maybe dad has his own special interest. Maybe dad doesn't want to go to church because it's overwhelming and sensory, or maybe dad is doing some social inappropriate things at church that could cause issue, or maybe they've gone to marriage therapy and maybe the pastor has inadvertently overused a scripture, which now a person with a black and white thinking has really latched onto. I'm just going to throw out 2 Corinthians 7:4, Ephesians 5, as 2 verses that get stuck out there. And now if you've got an individual with more black and white rigid thinking, and now believing that they have the Bible and a pastor backing them up for some of their behaviors, that can create quite a different parenting marriage perspective. And so the divorce rate in a neurodiverse family is between 70 and 80%.
Yeah. So as a church, how can a church support a neurodiverse marriage?
I think kind of going back very the beginning is with autism being the fastest growing developmental delay and difference across America, and I think across the world. I didn't get a chance to fact check that, but I think it's growing, globally. That first of all, just understanding autism awareness and acceptance, understanding, moving to this kind of neurological approach that some people do have different ways that their brain wires, and just kind of, again, moving out of that religious, spooky model into a little bit of brain science and understanding that there are different people with different brain sets. But when you get a couple coming to you, especially if they are identifying that they are a neurodiverse couple, they may call themselves ASNT, which is autism spectrum neurotypical, or they've identified as having a child on the spectrum and maybe they don't quite know what's going on with dad or mom. It could be either, both genders equally. But just understanding that you're going to need a different approach. And if you're not sure what to do, please refer them. Sometimes pastors are usually the first place that a couple will go for marital support. And if they've identified, or that there's autism in their family, you need to be very careful about what you're saying, because many of the wives, and there might be wives watching in the chat, but they would say that they have felt like the pastor really emboldened their husband's position by some of you just need to serve him better. You just need to then, if he's getting overwhelmed, then just don't make him overwhelmed. Or if he's fussing about your lack of routine, you just need to adapt then to his routine, versus okay, wait a minute, what is each person's responsibility here? And maybe if you're struggling, sir, and you're on the spectrum, what are some things you're going to have to do to mitigate the impact? I never believe in neurotypicalizing anyone, but there are some things that have to be done in moderation. A huge thing, let's just pick collections. A lot of the men I work with have collections. So let's just say they have a collection and their collection's taking up the house, or it's becoming a hoarding issue, or they're spending the mortgage money for their special interest or whatever that activity is. And the pastor's like, well, he's the head of the house, so he can make all the financial decisions he wants without any input from the wife. Well, have you taken into consideration that they're not paying their mortgage, or maybe the child with special needs isn't getting what they need because his need for this collection or golf, or pick the subject, is dominating, and you just told him as the man, he gets to do that with no input from his wife. So understanding that these things, some outburst can still happen as an adult, the special interest can take over the household. And as a woman who were, told submit, 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 sometimes they feel what do I do then? He's quote the head of the household, but he's making all these decisions sometimes that are not in the best interest of the marriage and family. We go to our religious leader and he essentially tells me I just have to suck it up and do whatever he says because he's the guy. And so those kinds of things, just a basic understanding of, okay, so what might be different with someone who has executive function issues, impulse control issues, especially in the area of sexuality and physical intimacy. That's a whole other discussion in and of itself. But that becomes very damaging, usually to the female in the relationship.
Yeah. So along with this, we got a question that came in. A gentleman says, I'm autistic and my wife's neurotypical. Researching through the subject of neurodiverse marriages, it is almost impossible to find resources directly applied to marriages. Do you have or know of resources that are available? And then before you answer that, why don't you also share some of this exciting stuff that you are getting ready to launch here in the coming months too?
Well, thank you so much, whoever wrote that. I am one of the few in the United States that is a reverend and a counselor who specifically works with neurodiverse couples. And because of that, I am launching a training institute, the International Association of Neurodiverse Christian Marriages, specifically to train counselors and ministers to help better meet the needs of neurodiverse couples. You could help me also. I've been reaching out to some really large ministries, and I won't name them or call them out, but there are some large ministries that work with marriages and families that aren't quite sure that this is a big enough issue to put something in place into their ministry. So I think we can also help. I usually have a little letter writing campaign with some of my couples every once in a while to reach out to some of the bigger ones out there to say, hey, I don't see marriages supported in my situation. But to your question about resources, as far as wanting a faith-based counselor, sadly, I'm a unicorn in that area. There are some other secular colleagues that are doing a really great job. The problem is that some of the things that they would say are options in marriage, we do not believe in as a covenant marriage. So other secular counselors are okay with open marriage, open use of pornography, or a lot of other things, again, that we can't go along with in a Christian covenant marriage. So this is a growing area of need. And so out there, on the radio show that I do on Converge Autism Radio, I've done a couple of podcasts on it to get some information about why neurology matters. But to your bigger point, there's not a lot of resources out there, and I'm really sorry to have to say that.
Yeah. How can they find out more about your resources that you're putting together? Is that available yet?
You can at least find me on my new organization is not quite launched, and my website's a little behind. But in my counseling ministry, you can find me at www.holmes, like my last name, HOLMES, ASR.com. So www.holmesasr.com. And then there's a contact me button, and that would get you to Dr. Stephanie. And while I can't take on any new clients right now, is I've got a wait list till midsummer. But there is a way that anything I have put together, I have found some articles. There's a couple of articles out there. There's a couple of podcasts out there. I've kind of put them together in a little standard email and said, okay, here's some things to get you going. Here's 5 podcasts and 2 articles that are out there. Maybe this will give you some basic information, and I can get that to people free, just if they reach out and, send them what's available out there, which sadly it is abysmal.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. So thank you so much for doing that. We've got probably just enough time to do one last question that came in. Question is, he says, I'm a pastor at a church, do a lot of marriage counseling, but recently I've had a family with a child with special needs came in for marriage counseling. and they get upset with me because I just cannot understand what they are going through. How can I better counsel and mentor them through this?
Okay, that's a really good question. There's certain things that unless you've walked through it or experienced it, it's really hard to have that level of empathy. So God prepared me, obviously, with a child with autism, to be able to make that connection very easily. But I think some of the things that we talked about, is spending some more time in the disability community, doing some research, Johnny and Friends, SOAR, Key Ministry, and just kind of educating yourself on, what is cerebral palsy and how might that affect a family? What is autism? What is whatever that special need is? And at least do some academic research on what is it that this family is going through? What are some just basic articles that say, maybe some of the financial issues or some of the therapeutic issues that this family is encompassing. So even that can at least give you a starter for sympathy, to better understand where they're coming from. Because I remember when I reached out for therapeutic help, before I was Dr. Stephanie Holmes, and I was like a mom, I kind of found that same thing. Like, you keep telling me the same advice, but you're not hearing why it's hard for me to have a date night.
Right.
Every week you're telling me the same thing, but you're not, and you're telling me not to stress, so that will help my hives or my anxiety, but you haven't told me how to lower the stress, or how do I get a respite weekend? So it feels like they were spitting out these kind of Christian cliches and giving me verses that started to feel very dismissive and very devaluing of my experience, instead of like, wow, that is really hard. Tell me more about why this is hard for you, and what kind of supports do you wish that you had? And by at least having that conversation, instead of sometimes in the church, we won't let a family really grieve or talk through what's going on. We want to bring them back to joy and contentment and fruit of the Spirit, which are very important. But we don't do a good job helping families, couples, people either grieve or express their pain, express their sadness, express their anger, frustration with God. That was a big issue with me. Why did this happen? Why did it happen to her? Why did it happen to me? And then without being like, who would say such a thing about God and question God? And then give me Job 38 or something, I think, to read as why I should never do that again. So in kind of understanding and remember that the Bible says that there's a time for weeping and a time for joy, and mourn with those who mourn and rejoice with those who rejoice. So some of it might be starting with what's the feeling they're going through and being there with them in that. But also, if you found out a little bit more about their child and what they were going through, that would probably go a long way to make a connection that you're actually trying to care about their specific situation versus giving Christian platitudes and scripture band-aids.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'll add one thing to that, and it's kind of going along with that, but it's actually trying to walk in their shoes. And one way you can walk in their shoes is, in invite yourself into their household, where maybe say, hey, would you mind if I bring dinner in for your family and I can have dinner with you? And tell them, don't try to get everyone to act. I just want to experience what life really is like. And let the kids be normal and have that behavior. This is also a great way to try to help show you any senior leadership when you're trying to, help them see the importance of having a disability ministry, so that they can get an idea of what life is like for you as you go through things. But that's just one other thing. And then most importantly, if you're just having a ton of difficulty and you're not making connections, refer it out to a professional who can do the help. Don't keep trying to fight it on your own, because usually what'll happen, that family will just bail and say, you don't care, the church doesn't care, and I guess we just have to pull the eject button. And that's the last thing you want. So you can also contact us here at SOAR. We've got some connections and contacts, so we can help you with that as well. But Stephanie, thank you so much. You know, again, as always, we could have gone on a bit more, but we've come to the top of the hour here. Couple of announcements I've got for everybody. First off, next week's Talk with Doc, going to be a very important, very timely talk for us right now. Dr. Steve Gersovich from Key Ministry will be joining us, and we are talking on just how we can have helping kids with special needs with mental health in a pandemic. So it's not just being able to help parents recognize when these mental health issues are rising, but how to help prevent them, how to guide them through, because we're seeing mental health issues skyrocket right now in all kids, but especially our individuals with special needs. So make sure you turn in next week for that with Dr. Steve. It'll be a great talk, and we're looking forward to that. A couple other announcements. SOAR is happy to announce we are looking for interns for this summer. We've got several internships available, whether you want to work in special needs or communication, social media, video, or marketing. We're looking for all the, so especially if you're a college student, contact us at info@soarspecialneeds.org. Again, info@soarspecialneeds.org. We'd love to talk with you about that. Again, you know, if you enjoy these Talk with Docs and you want to partner with us financially, help continue these, you can go to soarspecialneeds.org/donate and help us out there. But Stephanie, thank you so much for being with us, and just, you know, any parting words you'd like to just leave us with as we coming up to the end here.
Wish I knew who said it, but someone said, do the next right thing. And I think whatever that means for the size ministry that you are, whether you're a small church or a mega church, there's always one thing that you could be doing to do that next right thing. What's the next step that I can do to make a connection with a special needs family or couple? And even if you don't know, you can contact SOAR and Key Ministry and Joni and Friends to get that step going, but do something. To sit and say we can't do anything because we don't know what to do is not a place that we can be anymore. So just do the next right thing or the next step.
Amen. Can't agree anymore. And lastly, it's Super Bowl weekend. I just have to give a shout out to my Kansas City Chiefs, but especially to two football players who have huge hearts for individuals with special needs. So we're hoping for a big day for them, and that's Patrick Mahomes as well as McCole Hardeman. Both of them have huge hearts for individuals with special needs. So hope they have big days, and looking for the Chiefs to run it back for back-to-back championships. So everybody, we'll see you again next week. You all have a blessed day. Come soar with us. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.